Okay, our next speaker that we have up today is Caitlin.
So hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm going to be talking about effective mentoring today. So can I get through the blinding light? Who has actually been mentoring juniors or interns at some point in their career? Awesome. Okay, who is a junior or an intern currently? Yes, round of applause for those people coming along. It's really amazing to see people coming to this because, heads up, I am a junior developer. I've been a developer for just short of 5 months now, which is, a bit scary. But before that, so after the park ranger, after the science circus, I was a teacher for 5 years. So I know a little bit, hopefully, about education and about getting information across in a good way. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So while I was a teacher, I taught for about 5 years high school maths, science, so the subjects that most kids hate. Probably not the people in this room. We're good people. But I did have a lot of students who would struggle. But then sometimes you'd find a student who actually didn't really struggle but didn't believe that. I had this one girl called, I'll call her Melanie. I still don't really know if I can say names of students. I should probably check into that, but we'll call her Melanie because it's not her name. So she was in grade 9, grade 8 when I taught her, 7, 8, 9, I had her for 3 years. And she was really bright, really just talented at maths and science. And sorry, I pace a lot because otherwise I get really nervous. It's fine, it's working. But she really was good at maths and science. It came to her really naturally. And if anyone's ever heard of a concept called growth mindset, it's another big educational psychology thing that's kind of making its way into the tech community that I've seen as well. There's no such thing as someone who can't do, who can't learn a certain thing. It's just, that people are at different parts of their journey. But it was something that was easier for her than a lot of other people. But she would quite often shut down when she encountered any kind of roadblocks. So she'd find something that she didn't know, and I'd go over and explain it to her. And I'd say, okay, Melanie, does that make sense? And she'd just give me this completely flat pan look and be like, mm-hmm. And I'd be like, wait, no, is that an actual nod? What do you mean? And she's like, mm-hmm, yeah. And it was super frustrating because I never had any idea if she was just being an annoying teenager or if she actually understood what was going on or not. And it made it really hard to help her. And that's pretty normal for teenagers because being a teenager is hard, it's scary. There's lots of peer pressure, there's lots of feeling like you don't fit in and lots of feeling like you've got to be a certain way. And it's really scary not knowing what's going on and not knowing something and asking questions. So heads up, being a junior is terrifying because that's exactly what you do all day. You just don't know things and then you find something else that you also don't know. And then surprise, it's like, hey, I know this thing, and then you try and you're like, oh, turns out I also didn't know that thing. But it's good, it's fun, it's problem solving, it's challenging. But people, we were all teenagers at some point. There's probably at least a teenager in this room, maybe, I don't know, hiding somewhere. But a lot of that sort of fear of looking looking silly for making a mistake, that stays with us. And in terms of, being able to learn things, this ties in really well with what Lena, where she is, she's disappeared, there she is. She's hidden at the back now that she's not speaking again. With what she was saying, it's scary to fail, but it's really important, and it's really important to make those attempts. And it's also probably relevant to point out that our juniors and our interns are really different from how they would have been 10, 20 years ago. A lot of people now aren't coming through that traditional course of, I finish high school, I go to uni, I study computer science or information technology, I get a job. Okay, so a lot of people now are coming from, other careers, coming from boot camps, being self-taught online, and so it's even, more scary for them because now all of a sudden there's all these people from all different directions coming. All of them feel like there's one thing that they're not good at. Oh, this person, they're self-taught, how amazing is that? Oh, that person has a computer science degree, how amazing is that? And there's so much competition and so much, feeling like if you don't do what you're doing well, there's someone right there behind you ready to take your place. So what's really important, here comes the educational psychology, is that we actually provide enough support. And so this isn't just, nice, fluffy, oh, it'd be nice if people feel good, which, it is. It's good to feel good. But it actually, studies have shown that the most important thing in learning is that there's sufficient support. So as you get more support and more challenge, things change. great statement, Caitlin, good job. So obviously we've got our different aspects there. So the one that we really, really want to avoid here is regression. So if you've got a lot of challenge, if something's really difficult for you and you have no support, it's not just like, oh, well, I didn't learn something today. People actually tend to go backwards. There is actual regression. You start questioning things you already know and start getting confused with other things, and it's actually really bad. If there's challenge and support, that's obviously the ideal. That's what we're aiming for. That's growth. That's when you're going to be learning new things and getting better, which obviously we want. But if you don't have enough challenge and you've still got support, you know what? You're still fine. You've still got validation. You've still got someone feeling good about themselves, which is going to put them in a better place and going to make them feel, you know, more able to keep going and keep trying and learning new things. And then obviously if there's no challenge and no support, people are just staying in the same place, which, yeah, you know, not really great, but not the end of the world. But what you want to be really careful about is providing a heap of challenge and not enough support and then going backwards. So, more educational psychology. Great slide. So this looks like a, you know, nice little like bullseye targety thing. Wrong. You don't want to hit that bullseye. It's bad. How supportive I am, right? Okay, so this is called Piaget's zone of proximal development. And the concept is that, you know, sometimes we see this on a kind of continuum. I like the bullseye. So you've got things that you can do by yourself. And then you've got things that you cannot do. And then in the middle, you've got this zone of proximal development, which are things that you can do as long as you've got the right support. In tech, I like to add an extra circle, which is like I can do with Google. Which is like probably where most of us spend most of our time. Most of us are going to have to Google at some point. You know, again, if you're doing things without needing to check something, you know, how bored is that? Like, how boring. But a lot of, you know, interns and juniors who really want to make sure they're sitting in that googly, helpful person zone. So you don't want to have things that they can't do, because again, that's when we're going to get regression. You don't want to have things that are too easy, because then they're not learning. They're not developing. And the whole point of having juniors, no one hires juniors to just do basic, easy stuff forever. You hire them because you want to make them better. You want to make them valuable, and that's what they want too. They're desperate to learn new things and desperate to be helpful and productive and actually, you know, contribute to your team. So everyone's like, okay, yeah, that sounds good, I can do that. But how am I meant to know where is that right level? It's really, really hard. That's why people get education degrees and then still don't know. But fortunately, there's lots of ways you can actually find out. And there's probably lots of people being like, well, why don't I just ask them? Not really going to help. Remember Melanie at the start? Not her real name. You know, I ask her, okay, does that make sense? Do you understand that? And she just gives me a sort of nod. Because if someone's specifically asking you, do you understand? You don't want to say no to that. That's a horrible thing to say no to. So instead, you need to think about how you're asking your questions. And you need to make sure that they are asking questions as well. The other thing as well is that if someone asks you, and in tech as well, if someone's like, oh, do you understand, you know, routing or something? I'd be like, oh yeah, I understand routing, but then there's like this level understanding, and this level, and this level, and this level. And trying to figure out exactly what level you're at is really hard, because it's impossible to really know what's at those steps above you. It's impossible to know exactly where you are in that continuum while you're still in it. And that applies even if you do sort of fully understand a small concept, because you're not sure if there's more aspects that you don't know. So some of the techniques we can use, okay, so these I'm going to link, I've got my Twitter handle down there, and I'll put a post up with the link to these slides, and also I think they're being recorded, so don't like take notes, but these are actually really handy things to just go back and refer to when you're having issues with a junior that you're trying to mentor and you're not sure how to make that happen. Oh, I'm talking really fast. Okay. But this is a great concept. See one, do one, teach one. Okay, so nothing helps us realize what we're struggling with than trying to teach it to someone and then them asking us a question and us not knowing the answer. So that's a really good way for our juniors to actually discover how well they know a subject. And it's also a really good motivator for studying up hard on something when you know you have to tell someone else about it the next day. So you can mix this up. This doesn't have to always be like a sort of a very structured thing. It sometimes can be like, okay, like explain to me this thing. Or sometimes it could be, you know, send them home saying, I'm going to ask you about this tomorrow, okay? Give them some time, give them some warning, let them prepare, and then come back and see how they do. When you're doing this as well, obviously you want to allow time for new concepts to sink in. You don't want to teach them something at 11 a.m. and then at 1 p.m. be like, okay, teach it back to me. That's not really proving that they've kept any of that information. That's not really proving that they've understood it fully. So giving them 24, 48 hours is a really good time frame in order to help that go from like that short-term memory to that long-term memory, which is where you want things to be. And also mix up who your juniors are delivering these lessons to. So sometimes it could be back to the mentor. Sometimes it could be to another intern or another junior. It could be to one of their other peers. I've done this a couple of times to our sort of non-technical founder of our company, director of our company. He's probably, when I started doing that, he knew more than I did, and now I know more than he does. It's great. But it's good to mix up who they're delivering them to, and then you have that opportunity to keep questioning further to sort of see where that understanding goes. Another really good aspect that we've started doing at my company as well is actually getting your juniors and interns to review code reviews. So it's not just a case of code reviews being good for you to pick up what they've done wrong in their code, but it's actually a really good opportunity for them to practice reading code, seeing good code, and it feels really great when you get to pick up something in some like senior's code and you're like, oh, couldn't you have used a ternary for that? And they're like, oh, I could have. That happened to me once and it was such a great feeling. And you're feeling like you're learning and it's a good opportunity. And it also, is really good for your, mid-level senior developers to make sure that they're actually being really careful about what they're doing. Make sure you're providing a variety of examples. Make sure you're not getting to review stuff that is just, way above their heads because there's not a lot of point. But stuff that's a little out of their comfort zone, it might give them ideas of, oh, I haven't encountered that before. That's a new thing I can do. Or, it's just experience reading code, which is always helpful. Or it can just be, reinforcing stuff that they already know. I have a clicker sitting here that I have not been using this entire time. I've been walking back and forth, and I have an excuse to stand in one place. Okay. One of the things that is important to do is make sure you're paying attention to the questions that your juniors are asking. So asking questions, it's great. There's no such thing as asking too many questions. There's such a thing as asking the same question too many times. So if someone is asking about the same concept over and over, you need to think about, okay, what isn't sinking in? What isn't hitting with this person? You might need to make sure you're explicitly taking some time to go through that and to make sure that they're understanding that properly. You don't want to be asking the same thing over and over again and staying in that same place. But again, on the flip side, people who aren't asking questions, it doesn't mean that they get it. It means that, it could mean that they get that particular topic, but it more likely means that they are just so overwhelmed that they don't even know where to begin. So making sure that you're actually keeping track and like literally, if you have someone to keep note of the types of questions, the topics they're asking about, that's amazing, do that. And keeping track of what questions they're asking so you can see if there's patterns. And if they're not asking enough questions, it means that, either they're not understanding or they're not being challenged. You're not in that right area for them. Okay. Now, these are some like concrete tips that you can actually give your juniors because again, mentoring is time consuming. It's one of those things like, test-driven development. No one really has the time to write the tests at the start, but you all know it's going to make your code base better at the end. You all know that it's the thing that you should be doing. And so, making sure that they actually ask these questions first makes you making sure you are getting the most out of your time that you have to give as a mentor. And these are all things we know, but even having like a little checklist somewhere is like super helpful. So making sure they're doing the basic things, like separating it out step by step into pseudocode. Okay, if I haven't done that, I don't know what step I'm missing. Have a rubber ducked. Again, like having an actual rubber duck, I can't keep track of the number of times I've like rubber ducked a real human. I'm like, I should have done that before wasting that person's time. They don't mind usually, but it frustrates me that I know, like if I had an actual physical rubber duck, I might actually attempt to do that first. So give them a physical rubber duck. Have I Googled? How much have I Googled? Like, have I actually read through things? Have I just skimmed through the Google, the search results page and gone, oh, it doesn't really seem like this is answering anything. Have a read of a few things. You also want to make sure that they know that they shouldn't be spending an hour on one little thing trying to figure it out themselves, okay? So there's the balance you've got to strike between them actually having that process of problem solving and figuring out themselves and just wasting their time. And also making sure that they can articulate what they're expecting to happen that isn't. Why should it be happening? Where in the code am I saying, okay, well, this should happen, this should happen, this should happen? Have they, done some debugging? Have they figured out what step is going wrong? I still have this thing in my hand that I'm not using. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So tying it again to the failure stuff, okay, you want to make a safe space for failure, because one of the hardest things is to know that there's something that you should have asked a question about yesterday, and now you feel too stupid to ask that question, and you're going to end up, just compounding that thing that you're missing that vital information on. So making sure that there's a safe space to ask those questions at the start, making sure they know that you're not, infallible, that you're going to make mistakes, you're not perfect either, and that, even the most senior people are going to have things that they don't know. No one's just writing code without, using Google. Everyone is having to ask questions. Everyone is making mistakes. Everyone has to debug their things. Everyone breaks production. I haven't yet. It's going to happen. But yeah, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there are the opportunities where they can make sure that they're asking the best questions and that they're getting to that stage, making sure they're asking themselves the questions first. Okay, so one of the tips you can actually do, so these are some great mechanisms we can actually use during our mentoring steps, but in terms of making sure those can go as well as they can, it's actually really important that you include these sort of things in your hiring process. And that applies actually to the juniors and interns and maybe people who haven't got their first tech job as well. So when you're interviewing people, you should be making sure that they're asking questions. You should be making sure you're including that in the job ad to say, yeah, we want people who are going to ask questions, who are going to problem solve, who are going to work with the team, aren't just going to sit there silently and puzzle over it for hours and hours. And if you're a junior, make sure you're asking about the mentoring processes that are in place at that company. So make sure you're asking, okay, who is going to be mentoring me? How many different mentors am I going to have access to? What do I do if I'm not clicking with a mentor or if I'm not getting the support I need? Making sure that they have answers to those things is a really good way of deciding or determining whether that's a company that's going to be supportive for you. A really good thing is actually using, if you're doing technical interviews, using that as an opportunity to test your mentors as well. Not test them in a bad way, but just sort of see how they're going. So making sure that it's explicit that you're saying, okay, we're going into this, the person that's being interviewed, make sure that they know they're meant to ask questions so they don't feel like asking questions is going to not get them the job. Because you want to see what type of questions do they ask, how they work, how they bounce ideas off someone when they ask questions. And it's actually a really good opportunity for you to also observe your mentors and see how they're responding to that and if they're being supportive and if they're being welcoming of those questions. Okay. And on that topic, mentoring is really hard. So I know I've given some tips and these are some things you can use, but it is not a skill that most people in tech jobs were hired for. It's not something that most people think of when they go to uni to study computer science. They're not thinking, I'm going to go out and mentor people. They're thinking, I'm going to write some code, and that's totally fine. So what you need to do as an employer as well is make sure that you're providing that support so that your mentors have time to do their job as a mentor. Because it's not fast, it's not easy, it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. It's something that you need time for, it's something that you need time actually set aside to say, okay, this is the time, this is how many hours in my week I get to actually sit down and do some pair programming with this junior. This is how many hours I have to actually sort of sit aside from them and think about, okay, what are they being challenged by? What do I need to, set them some tasks on? How can I make sure they're learning something new today, this week, next week? Right. And if we're sort of wrapping up, the idea is that it needs to be challenging, but it needs to be supportive. If you're going to bring on juniors, they're not worth your money if you're not going to make the most of them, if you're not going to encourage them and support them and help them get better. And if you've got a junior who's worth having, they're not going to stick around if you're not doing that either. They're not going to feel valued if they're just sort of sitting there doing the same things over and over. You need to make sure that you're actually getting the most out of them. And so, mentoring is about communication. And communication isn't a one-way process. It can be, you can be giving a talk, you can be writing a blog post. We do that a lot in tech. But it's really important to know with communication that it's all about communicating to someone and getting information back, getting that feedback about how they're going and how they're doing it. So essentially, in wrapping up, do more mentoring. Put the time into it, put the effort into it, make yourself, your juniors, your teams better.